rest, I'm going to have these closer to the door. All right, next are the film magazines. Both of these magazines take 400 feet of film. They're coaxial magazines, so instead of a film magazine that looks like this, where you have two spools on either end, this is a magazine in which there are two doors and the spools are nested side by side like this. And so one side is the feed and the other is the take-up. And the film travels through the throat of the magazine. This area is called the throat. The film will rest on the pressure plate right here. It will travel through one side, the feed side, into the other side down here, which is the take-up side. So when it comes to loading the film magazines, you will need a light, tight bag, film changing bag. And there are different kinds. There are some cheap ones you can find on Amazon. I would not recommend getting those. What I would recommend is going onto eBay and seeing if you can find a Harrison pup tent. What is a pup tent? That is such a strange name for a tent. A pup tent is essentially a light, tight tent with sleeves in which you can put your arms and comfortably load and unload film magazines. This is manufactured by Harrison. So it comes with these aluminum arms that essentially serve as the supports for the tent. When it comes to loading film magazines, dust is your enemy. So you want to make sure that anytime you handle your film magazines, before you even put them in the pup tent, that you use a air duster, have it be canned air like this, or a wonderful tool like the rocket blower, and you ensure that any excess dust on the surface of the magazines is removed. The same is true with your pup tent. So anytime you use the pup tent, make sure the exterior is free of debris and dust, because what will end up happening is you will touch the pup tent, you will get dust on your fingers, and then that dust, as you're loading your film, gets onto the film. And you do not want that. My advice is to always use these tools liberally. What I like to do before I load or unload magazines is to ensure that my tent is free of dust inside. So I take a vacuum and I use the hand tool to extract any dust or debris that's inside the pup tent. I think it's this is a medium size. So I feed this in like so. Okay. You can see how all of this takes quite some time. So there you are. You have your sleeves. You have the entrance to the tent. It's going to be unzipped. So there are two doors. We'll call them doors. That can be unzipped. So there's what the inside looks like. It's very dark, of course. It should be. And make sure if you're maintaining the pup tent, you want to vacuum inside this intermediary chamber here. So these are what the canisters from Kodak looked like. This is the 100-foot canister. It comes in a plastic box. This is a 400-foot canister. This is a steel can, and this is a 400-foot plastic canister. Kodak recently switched to making plastic cans instead of steel cans to save some money in the manufacturing process. When you get a 400-foot roll, it'll come in this black bag. There's no film in here, but it will be on one of these spools, and it will be sealed with some tape to make sure that it doesn't unravel in the canister during shipping. So before I do anything, I ensure that the film magazines are free of dust. This is just a cheap brush that you can get at a dollar store. And I open up the film magazine and I take any debris out of the magazine that might have fallen in. I already see some old bits of film. So as the film travels through the magazine, that protective layer sometimes shreds a little bit. That's why it's there. So you want to make sure all of those little pieces are out of your film magazine, because that will end up on your raw stock as you expose. I'll take that. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to give it a blast of this. Okay. It's very difficult to do this, being mindful of the cameras. So that side's clean. I'm going to clean the throat. So the throat is here. It doesn't look like this is that bad, but go ahead and blast it like this. Okay, when it comes to the pressure plate on the SR film magazines, it may have some dirt on it or some skin oil or heaven knows what. I make sure I blast that. I would say this throat is ready to go. I also inspect the caps after I set them down to make sure that they're dust free. So I just give them a small blast just to guarantee that they're free of dust. So we move on to the take-up side. We clean this. We do the same thing. We take this, move it down, take off the core adapter, and take our brush, go around. I already saw hair. There's no debris. I take my blaster. That seems fairly good. These are sometimes tricky to put on, these core adapters, because they have a square side and a round side. And the square side, of course, is to be flush with the square part of this cylindrical piece, which advances the feed and take-up side. Now we have a clean magazine. Before I put this into the pup tent, I give it a good blast of air. So let's pretend this space here is inside the pup tent. Okay, so I allocate one side of the pup tent for the film magazine, and before I put the film magazine in, I ensure that the magazine cap is removed, and I open the feed side door. It's one less thing I have to do blind inside the bag with my arms. And then I allocate another side for the canister. And before I put the film can in, I remove the can tape that's along the seam. When you receive your film, there will be one long strip of tape making sure that this does not crack open. What I end up doing to remove that is I place the can down on a flat surface. I take that end of the tape and pressing down on the can, I remove it by slowly revolving the can like so. And the tape comes out. And once you remove all of it, I put it aside and I put my hand down on this so that way no accident happens where it cracks open. Then I hold it with both hands tight like this. I place it on the other side of the pup tent. Okay, so now this is what it should look like inside the pup tent. This film gauge lever is pulled all the way down. My hands are inside the bag. I ensure that the doors are fully zipped and my environment is dark. I know that no light is going to be leaking through this bag. What I do is I take the film canister, I open it up, and I take the film out of the black bag. So I pull this out. Let's pretend the 400-foot spool is here. Remove this. You will feel it because there's one part of the tape that it doesn't have adhesive on the back, so it'll fold upwards when you run your finger around it. And then you can peel that, but make sure that you clamp the film together with your finger so that after you remove the tape, it's not going to unravel. Remove the tape. I always put it on the can like this so I can find it later if I need it. And then I move the spool of film onto the core adapter. I know this is a bad example with the daylight spool, but just for visual representation, you want the emulsion side facing up, okay? And then you want this protective plastic side facing down, because this is what's going to make contact with that gauge lever. So this is what goes into the light tight chamber here. That's how you want the film to travel through. You won't be working with a daylight spool like I just showed you. You'll just have a spool like this. Now once you fit that spool onto the core adapter, you're still grabbing onto that loose end. You slightly lift the spool up and you move this. You disengage the gauge lever here so that it lines up with the end of the spool. And you want to make sure that your spool is on top of this bottom end. You don't want to have the spool making contact with the disc part of this end. It's neatly nested in between. Then you can let go of that loose end. You can begin to feed your film into this light tight chamber. If you're using daylight spools, do not engage this gauge lever. You shouldn't do that because it'll damage the gauge. So you feed your film into this light tight chamber, okay? I can advance the film forward here with this gear on the other side. If I advance this forward and it's not moving forward, it's stuck, I need to move this gear up and slowly pull this film back until I hear a click. You hear that? So I know that's engaged now, and I can move this up and you can see that the film is coming through the front. So I've loaded my film on the feed side, and you can do the rest outside of the bag because that chamber is light tight. You're welcome to close the magazine door, but make sure that you lock, see these 2 feet, that you push those down in order to close the door, because if you leave those 2 up, the door is not going to close. And what I like to do is, in the bag, I feel around the edges of the magazine to make sure that none of the film may have been caught in the door. And I pull up on the door
to make sure that it's locked. Now your magazine is loaded and you can take it outside the back. You take this piece of film and you advance it forward, and something that's wonderful about these film magazines is that you have a little white mark here on the bottom of the magazine. This tells you how much film you need in order to create a perfect loop. So you pull this strip of film forward to that white mark, okay? Till the end of that strip of film is touching that white mark. And that is how much film is necessary to form the loop. This is a tricky part. You feed it into the other chamber. I like to grab maybe 1.5 inches down the strip of film and let it naturally curve down and slide into that chamber. So I just by gently pressing it, it should move into that part. Now, just like with the previous light tight chamber, I push the film forward gently until it doesn't move, and then I slide this advanced gear and I pull this strip of film back until I hear a click, and then I know the sprockets are engaged and I can advance forward. So now I have my loop, and if I open up the other door, you can see the film has gone through successfully. So the same is true with this film gauge lever. We pull it back, we take a spare spool and put it on the core adapter like so. Now we can move this gear backwards to reverse the film. When it comes to getting the film into this slot that's on the spool, plastic spool, it'll take a couple of tries to get it in perfectly. You advance the film forward. I like to see how it's bending in that slot. I like to just press it down and fold it, and then keep my finger on it as I am twisting this spool forward like so, okay? And then through friction, the film will naturally spool as it advances forward, like that. And I give it a couple of cycles to ensure that this is going to take up the film properly. Okay, so now what I can do is I can move this gauge counter lever onto the spool. So I move this upward and I lift up this spool just a little bit, so I know that those two discs are on either side of the spool, that the spool is neatly nested in between them. I know that's all ready, so I close this door. I lock it. I push my lever down and I pull up on the door to make sure this is not going to swing open. Okay. So we have our feed side ready, our take-up side ready. And now this magazine is ready to go for the most part. All we need to do is to give it one last little blast. Now when we're ready to load the magazine onto the camera, we take our loop here. As you can see, this is a double perf strip of film, regular 16mm, so you can see the two perfs. And I put the strip of film in between these little slots, okay? I don't know if you can see that on the camera. It's a little difficult. You see these silver little feet here. Ensure that the film is symmetrically aligned on that throat, so that both parts of the loop are equal to each other. We can put this cap back on. The next task is to tape all of the seams. So I like to use painter's tape for this. I have used grip tape. What it ends up doing is stripping all of the paint off of your magazine. So this is the most gentle tape that I can use. And I peel off strips here, and I find my seams. And obviously you want to make sure that you can see the numbers on the gauge still. So what I like to do is I run my finger along the seams here to ensure that the tape is nestled inside those cracks and crevices and is not going to allow any light to find its way in there. So I go around the entire magazine. I'm not going to do it to conserve tape, but I take one long strip, and sometimes I use the same strip of tape that goes along the seam of the film canister, and I tape the mag doors shut like this. So I go around the height of the magazine like this, and I know that these magazine doors are not going to fall open if I were to drop this, or if someone were to try to open the doors, that this is extra insurance to make sure nothing horrible happens. This notifies the cast and crew that this magazine is indeed loaded with film. When they see it taped like this, nobody wants to mess with it. Hopefully nobody wants to mess with it. The next step is marking the magazine. So it depends on what's necessary for your production. Given that Poet in Modern World is an independent film, the rudiments are all I need. So all I need to know is what kind of film is in this. So I look, of course, this is 250D. So I write 250D 7207. I make sure that the film number is on there. I also like to add the date, so I know when I had loaded this magazine, so 7/27/24. And that's usually all I add. When I shoot footage, I'll add a brief summation of what has been shot in this particular magazine, so I know. There are filmmakers that utilize camera logs. I don't have time for all of that, given that I have so many other responsibilities for this production. I'm the cinematographer, the director, the audio recorder, the producer. That's just more on my plate to take care of, so I want to simplify things as much as possible. I haven't had any trouble with the organization of the footage using this rudimentary method. So now we're ready to attach the magazine onto the camera, but first we have to prepare the gate to ensure that everything is clean and there isn't any additional dust that will end up on our footage. So I like to go ahead and take the air blaster and to clean that area of any residue or debris. The next task is to remove the cap for the gate, and I remove that. Anytime I'm changing film magazines, I take a little toothpick and I go into the gate, into the very corners, and gently move this toothpick around to pick up any little hair or piece of debris that might end up obstructing the footage. So next, I blast it again, but you want to be careful not to blast into the claw mechanism itself, because that hardware is very fragile. So you just, I bend this straw and gently press the trigger for the air blaster. Okay, So that seems to be very clean. So we remove the cap. Now we attach it to the camera body, and there is a light trap here. So underneath this little plane is the locking mechanism for the magazine. You see this hinge piece here. Those pegs fit underneath that platform into the locking mechanism, and we can hinge the magazine like this. So the wrong thing to do at this moment is to slam the magazine onto the gate. That's going to damage your camera. So what you should do is gently drop the magazine down, okay, like that. And you want to lift up to make sure that it's properly locked in. Next, you take this little lever here and push it forward to officially lock the film magazine. So nothing is going to happen to this magazine. It's not going to accidentally disengage. It is locked and loaded, as they say. The next step is to engage the claw into the sprockets of your film. Okay? So there is this, and it's difficult on this modification because the video tap is where the light meter once was on this unit. The SR series had a built-in light meter, and usually people use external light meters, handheld light meters, so it rendered it useless. And what Visual Products did is allocate the light being reflected from the mirror to the light meter for a video tap. And so they put the video tap where the light meter would have been. So the problem with this is that it makes it difficult to advance this little lever here. You have to use your fingernail to push it upwards. And I went ahead and added a little mark here to show which way one must turn to advance the film forward. So to engage the sprocket claw with the film, you simply turn this forward. You hear that click? That means that the claw has engaged. Now I can advance this forward. And this is ready to shoot. Give it a little test run here. So there's this red button here. You'll see the word test next to it. I press that, I hold it down. You can hear the claw advancing slowly. This is a way for you to ensure the claw is indeed engaged and that there won't be any trouble with the film advancing. This lever is to run the camera. So there's a standby mode. If I pull this down halfway, is standby mode. The standby mode powers any onboard electronic accessories. So there are these two airy pin inputs. So I'm going to go ahead and run the camera just for a couple of seconds. Okay, so this would be an excellent time to check if your film's being scratched. So you run the camera for a couple of seconds and you pull the film magazine out and you hold your film magazine to a light and let it sheen. And I do not see any scratch marks whatsoever. So next, we reattach the magazine. You press the test button to make sure that everything is in sync. So this magazine is ready to film.
Camera rolling and action.
Production for Poets in a Modern World has reached its midpoint. Because of the continuous support of countless people across the world who yearn for art created with sincerity and purity, 20% of the funds necessary to tell half of this story were raised. With over 2 miles of footage sent through our 16mm camera, another 2 miles remains untraveled. Only 49% of Poet in a Modern World is left to capture. My gratitude for those who have helped us along the way is inexpressible. This film has been chiefly funded out of my own pocket, and now the rest of the budget lies in the hands of its supporters. If you desire to see the completed film, please consider giving towards the latter part of production to carry our sales to the final destination. Once Poet in a Modern World is ready for the screen, the picture will be taken around the United States for screenings at a myriad of independent cinemas and any film festivals that aren't frightened by its countercultural nature. It is the hope of my cast and crew that the last reel of film will roll through the camera towards the end of 2024. Visit bit.ly/support-poet to join our voyage and help us create a more beautiful cinema together.